Hello and welcome back to Write America, a literary series spearheaded by author Roger Rosenblatt in an effort to bridge the great divide in our country through readings and conversations from award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers. I'm Lauren, Book Review's publicist and event coordinator. For those of you who are not familiar with our store, Book Review is Long Island's largest independent bookstore. I'm so excited to be back here with you all for another night of Write America, this time featuring writers Amy Hempel, Emily Bernard, and Kurt Andersen. If you happen to miss last week's episode with Kirsten Valdez-Quaid and Nick Flynn, or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go back to Book Review's Crowdcast channel at any time and watch the recordings. Tonight's episode is also going to be recorded, so if you miss something, or you can always go back and rewatch the episode again. But before we get started with the readings, there's a few things that I'd like to show you about Crowdcast that you'll need to know for tonight's event. First of all, there is a button right down here. If you click that button, that will bring you to bookreview.com, where you can purchase signed copies of Kurt, Amy, and Emily's books. There is also going to be a audience Q&A at the end of the event, so there's an Ask a Question button right down here. If you click that button, you can submit a question for Kurt, Emily, and Amy. And then there is also the chat, which I see that you guys have found. So please feel free to comment about the event, talk about it amongst yourselves, and of course, drop your emoji applause. So without any further ado, we're going to get started. Our first reader tonight is Amy Hempel. Amy is the author of Sing to It, The Dog of the Marriage, Tumble Home, At the Gates of the Animal Kingdom, Reasons to Live, and the co-editor of Unleashed. Her stories have appeared in Harper's, Vanity Fair, GQ, Tin House, The Harvard Review, The Quarterly, and have been widely anthologized, including Best American Short Stories and the Best Non-Required Reading. So please welcome to the screen, Amy Hempel. Hi, Amy.
Hey.
Thank you for being here with us tonight. We are excited to see what you have for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lauren. Of course, my thanks to Roger, who's somebody I feel I could pretty much thank every day for something. I am really honored to be reading tonight with Emily and Kurt. This is the first time I've worn speakers, so I'm getting used to my voice. I'm going to read part of an older story titled Pool Night, because all of us have watched coverage of the terrible and more frequent flooding and fires and everything else that's happening because of what people are doing and not doing for the planet. And I was thinking about I've been in 2 floods. I was thinking about the first one, which is when I was about 13 or so. And even back then, I remember this was a flood in which no one died. Okay. And I was thinking about how moved I was, even as a kid, by even the small things that people did when they rallied around each other. Okay, part of Pool Night. It was 28 years since the river topped its banks, all that time since a flood skunked the reservoir and washed out people's homes. We've watched the water come when it did. From patios late at night, the neighborhood watched the water move. A flash of light like strobe light would go off on the ground as the watery debris snapped a high-tension tower. When the wires touched the water, that part of town went black. This was the thing we watched, the city going dark along the path of the flood. It was not supposed to reach us, and then it did. Evacuation was calm and quick, except for Dr. Winton. Dr. Winton drank down most of his liquor cabinet and stared at the Red Cross volunteers who put their van in park and went in and hauled him out. Most of us saw that happen, but during the days of cleanup, it was not what anyone mentioned. We talked about the racehorses loose from Centennial Track, how they had cantered over lawns and stumbled on buried sprinkler heads. Indoors were rolls of wet toilet paper swelling on bathroom rods. We found letters, and water had washed off the ink. We talked about Bunny Winton, who ordered a new living room the first morning after. She said she was happy to see her armchairs go, the padded arms cat-scratched down to cotton batting. "You open up or you shut down," Bunny said, and went out and got her hair styled new. Film crews photographed the swim team at the club. They were lined up by the snack bar, waiting to get a tetanus shot so they could shovel mud. Bunny made the nightly news. The Vita font spelled out "victim" on her chest. They showed her in a tree, wrapping washcloths around a branch so that the wet, bent wood would not squeak against the roof. That was on what would have been pool night. "It's all in the mouth," Gray said, and showed me again and again. He said if the mouth is relaxed, the person looks good. We were looking at pictures of ourselves and family. The looking was my mother's idea, my mother, who was the thoughtful one. Here's what my mother thought of when she heard that Bunny Winton had lost their photograph albums. She put me to work on ours. Gray came over to help me at her invitation, of course. Gray was Bunny and the doctor's son, the child they could not now watch grow up in snapshots, page after page, until my mother remembered that he grew up in ours. We would pull every picture that included Gray Winton, print up another, and present a new album to his grateful parents. Gray was a junior lifeguard at the pool. He tanned to the color of the cornflakes he ate each morning, and I knew girls who saved his chewed gum. Gray was the only boy excused from working cleanup. That was the week he was under observation. He and my brother were aquazaniacs. They trained with the coach to do slapstick acrobatics off the high dive at the pool. There were 6 aquazaniacs in 1890 stripes who hurled themselves into the water in syncopated ways. Gray would stand on my brother's shoulders, and together they dove as the 12-foot man. In the pratfall sport of clown diving, the walk-around gainer is a popular stunt. This is where you run to the end of the board and then keep on running, out in the air, a cartoon, so fast you flip over backward. Put gravity at your service is how they said they did it. But during rehearsal, Gray candied out. He hit his head on the board coming down. It would have kept him from diving on pool night if we had had pool night, but the rain day gave him time to try to perfect the fire dive. In the album, there were pictures of Gray and water. The first one was in our bathtub, playing Stormy Ocean with my brother as a baby. Later, they pole a raft across the lake, poking an oar at snapping turtles. There's a picture of the 3 of us on skates, on ice. Some of the photographs were Polaroid ones. They were faded, but the fugitive images remained. Emulsion on others had turned metallic bronze. The snapshots held deep tarnish like a mirror. There were quite a few pictures of Bunny, too. With the unphotogenic's eagerness to pose, she increased her chances of the one good shot that would let her relax, having proof at last that she had once looked good, just once. The doctor couldn't make it to the picnics or to the skating, so he didn't show up in the pictures either. The effect was of him saying after the flood, "What I lose will always be lost." His problem is the past, Gray said about his father. He says only do things you have done before and liked, whereas me, what's coming is the thing I'm looking out for. I thought the present was the safer bet. We can only die in the future, I thought. Right now, we're always alive. Gray trusted water. He continued to trust it after the flood. He believed it would save him, and he counted on this or the fire dive. I saw him do it once, which is all the times he did it. When the swimming pool was filtered and rechlorinated, he carried a can of gasoline to the high board. He wore a sweatshirt with a hood and matching drawstring pants. He dove into the water with the top and bottoms on, then pulled himself out by the ladder on the side. It was night, and I had my camera ready. He sprinkled his wet clothes with gasoline as though he were watering plants. He said wet cloth would pull the fuel away from his skin. He said to imagine this, that the moment he hit the water aflame, when he made this dive on the next pool night, that's when he would have a cannon go off. Then he struck a lighter, and he lit himself up good. I got it all on film, the Human Torch, the flaming spiral twists that he scripted in the air, the hiss of reclaimed life when the water took him in. It only lasted seconds. It seemed an extravagant risk, and that is how I put it. But he said, I made those seconds live. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Amy. Just give me a second here while my camera turns back on, if it does. Here we go. Thank you so much. We will see you back for the conversation. Thanks, Amy. All right, up next, we have a reading from Emily Bernard. Emily is the author of Black is the Body and has been the recipient of grants from the Ford Foundation, the NEH, and the W.E.B. Du Bois Resident Fellowship at Harvard University. Her essays have been published in journals and anthologies, among them The American Scholar, Best American Essays, Best African American Essays. Please welcome Emily Bernard. Where are you? Emily, there you are. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Lauren, for everything you've done to put this together. I want to thank Roger Rosenblatt for inviting me to be part of this amazing event. And thank you to Kurt and Amy for welcoming me. I'm going to read from Motherland, an essay in Black is the Body. In this scene, my husband, John, and I are in Ethiopia on our way to meet our daughters and their family for the first time. My daughters were born in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, near a town called Adigrat, where hundreds of people were killed in the Tigray War, November and December 2020. It is an honor to read and remember my daughter's family and the people of Tigray tonight. It is 6:30 a.m. in Adigrat. Our driver, Girma, takes us slowly along the rough, packed earth. The mountains in front of us have seen everything. Their outlines are so precise, they seem like cutouts in the sky. We drive slowly as the road thins and then disappears, as if it has surrendered to the commanding natural landscape around us. Girma pulls the car to a gentle stop among small bunches of beaver-tail cactus with stems as wide and flat as paddles and decorated with bristles like stubble on a man's face. There are only 3 yards between us, but the men's voices sound tinny and far away. Underneath my feet, the earth is as light and packed as brown sugar. Within arm's reach is a small island of green bordered by a layer of rocks. In its center stands a tree with a thin trunk and a flowering crown, like a tall, skinny kid with an afro. In the distance, more trees, some dense and willowy, stand in a line on faded, cracked earth. The sky is thick with all the blue left in the world. I nearly trip on titanic pieces of shale. My boots catch in the valley of crevices between them. The sun quickly discovers the skin beneath my hair, hat, and the rest of my clothing. I feel its piercing impact in my joints and lungs. If we had been in the States, if we were anywhere else, I would have been preoccupied with how soon I could seek out a piece of shade under which to hide. But here, Even as I stoop, stumble, and trudge my way forward, I begin to understand that beneath this piercing sun and breathtaking sky is exactly where I belong. Everything lies in front of me, nothing is behind. There is no shelter, nowhere to hide. This sun, it may be relentless, but it is glorious too, evaporating any doubt about the road ahead. I stand up straight. The heat is not something to shun, I decide, but only something else to carry. As we approach a group of thatched huts topped with perfect cylinders of long grass, my heart beats so rapidly that I reflexively cover it with my hand. I smooth my shirt and adjust my hat. I hope I look like what my family wants for their twins. As we are greeted by the people to whom the girls belong, I imagine a woman being presented to a groom at the inauguration of an arranged marriage. We prepare to be treated like royalty, Helen, our adoption agent, had written in an unusually helpful email. Indeed, the girls' family has slaughtered a sheep in our honor. A large platter of the roasted sheep meat sits on a clay table. The loaf of bread we bought in Adigrat is placed on the side. Everyone gathers to eat, but after a few koken bites, I sit back on a bench molded from the same clay as the table and walls of the wide circular room. I try to arrange my features into an expression that communicates my appreciation for the food, my desire to enjoy it, and my inability to do so. I am not successful. It is clear from the quality of the murmurs. Emily doesn't like it, Berhanu, our translator, says, and smiles sympathetically. I can tell he is trying to translate the disappointment I've caused. It is terrible to know that I'm failing to demonstrate the boundless depth of gratitude I feel for everyone in this room. A torrent of emotions clogs my throat. My palms sweat and tingle. I'm rigid with anticipation, eager for the wonderful, terrible moment in which the girls will be placed in our arms. Beside me, John eats heartily and drinks sheep's milk from a tin cup. I cannot say no when the milk is offered to me. I feel multiple pairs of interested eyes as I bring the cup to my mouth. The twins' grandmother brings out the baby we will know as Isabella. She is wrapped in the same light blue quilted outfit that she wears in a picture that Helen sent months ago. Her grandmother, a slight woman with a lightly wrinkled face, stands in a space that separates two rooms of the family home. The sky shines a movie star light down on the two of them. Isabella regards me dispassionately as she takes in the entire scene. Julia emerges mid-wail. She is afraid because she has never seen white skin, Berhanu says, and gently touches John's arm. Julia continues to cry as we stand outside the compound and are presented with carrots so bright and large they could serve as props in a Bugs Bunny cartoon. John gathers us together for a photograph before we begin the trek back to the Land Rover. The return hike feels more arduous, the sun hotter, the air drier. I'm trying not to show my exhaustion. The grandmother has a swaddled Isabella strapped to her back. Her steps are light and efficient on veins of rock that protrude from the earth. I walk next to one of the baby's cousins, a girl of 11 or 12. Her eyes are large and kind. The braids in her hair shine. She wears Julia, who seems to be dozing, on her back, underneath a cloth secured to her faded green dress. We take turns looking at each other and then looking away before the other one catches us. There's so much I want to ask her and tell her, but the membrane of language, fine and opaque at once, travels with us like a mobile glass partition. Even though it feels a bit silly, the next time I sense her looking, I meet her gaze, and for the second time today, put my hand over my heart. I press down hard. When she looks away, she is smiling. You're part of our family now, an older male cousin tells us, but that's it for goodbyes. John and I are hustled into the car, whose rumbling engine inspires more caterwauling from Julia. The babies are shuffled around. I hold Julia, who screams and stares at me with tears cascading from her eyes. Isabella rests quietly in John's lap, snug in the nest of his arms and chest. Suddenly, she sits up and opens her mouth slightly. Sheep's milk spills out of her tiny body. Julia follows suit. For her second round, I take my hat and turn it upside down under her chin. 3 hours later, we have become almost used to the smell and the feeling of our daughter's vomit caked on our clothing. We are sticky with heat and sweat and bodily fluids by the time we arrive at the airport in Mekelle. John leaves the girls with me while he rushes to the bathroom to clean up my hat and rinse Isabella's excretions from her shirt. With the baby tucked into the crook of each arm, I sink into a plastic chair. My dizziness and blurry vision must be a result of the heat, I think. An older woman wearing a black hijab sits down next to me. She holds her arms open. I hand her Julia, and she pulls a small blanket from her belongings and hands it to me. She and John each take one of my arms when it's time to board. I still feel rickety as we walk toward the plane, but I have a firm grip on Isabella, who emerges from the cloth on my shoulder as slowly as a plant sprouting from the earth in a time-lapse video. She stretches her neck like a periscope and pivots her head slowly, a stern look on her face, like a general assessing a battlefield, or Magellan surveying the Atlantic, I think. And when she smiles, I believe we are sharing our first private joke. Julia has decided that it is my particular job to tend to her, so John and I trade babies once we are seated. She and I fall asleep quickly after takeoff. The thing about unpasteurized milk is that it does not agree with everyone. A few minutes later, a wave of pain propels me out of my seat and towards the bathroom. Along the way, I shove a miserable, indignant Julia into the arms of a pretty flight attendant. I'm on my hands and knees in the throes of thudding, seizing abdominal pain when the attendant knocks on the door. As soon as I undo the latch, she snatches the door open. I look up. She is stony. I am perpendicular. "Madam, your baby," she sniffs and presents me with Julia, who looks down at me with what appears to be alarm on her 12-month-old face. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Again, my camera, here we go. All right, we will see you for the conversation in just a few minutes. Thank you. All right, last but certainly not least, we have Kurt Andersen. Kurt is the author of the New York Times bestsellers Evil Geniuses and Fantasyland, as well as 4 critically acclaimed best-selling novels, You Can't Spell America Without Me, True Believers, Heyday, and Turn of the Century. He also writes for television and stage. Previously, he created and hosted the Peabody Award-winning public radio program Studio 360, co-founded Spy Magazine, served as editor-in-chief of New York Magazine, and was a columnist and critic for Time and The New Yorker. His work has won many awards, including the Langham Prize for the year's Best American Historical Novel and 2 Peabody Awards. Please welcome Kurt Andersen. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you. You're everything's working.
You just froze, but I think it's working. I'll leave you to it.
Okay. Well, I hope I'm not frozen for everyone else. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Roger Rosenblatt, who I must mention was a crucial mentor of mine almost 40 years ago when he was young. And I was a little bit younger. It is my privilege and pleasure to be here with Amy and Emily. Right America, what a one of the silver linings of this pandemic. And there's no real brief for what we're supposed to read or talk about for Right America, but what occurred to me of the stuff I've written is a novel that called Heyday that I published 15 years ago or something, that is about America when it was young. It's about 4 young people in 1848, and modern life in America was being born, and revolutions of various kinds were going on. And they traveled across North America, it ends up, searching for various things. So I'm going to read from that 2 bits. One, when they are still in New York and haven't even all met yet. This is there's a writer called Timothy Skaggs who started out being his parents wanted him to be a doctor. He ended up being a hack writer of various kinds and a bon vivant in New York. And this is he, or him. March 25th, 1848, New York City. Now I'm having another technical glitch. Hold on.
Is everything okay, Kurt?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, just checking.
Thank you, Lauren. 16 years earlier, when Timothy Skaggs was deciding to leave Dartmouth and enroll at Columbia's medical school instead, flipping out. Sorry about this, everyone. Very sorry. Should have stuck with the actual physical book, shouldn't I?
See, computers aren't all that.
I mean, I'm telling you. I'm telling you. Hold on one second.
No problem.
"16 years earlier, when he was deciding to leave Dartmouth and enroll in Columbia's medical school instead, his father had warned him that New York City has the air of the permanent carnival about it, as if half its population were on a spree. New York really had taken on the air of a permanent carnival this spring, and now there was another happy mob, even larger than last Saturday's Mexican War Gala. A slow-moving 80-foot wide herd of New Yorkers, a festival of the peoples, celebrating the European insurgency that the newspapers were calling the springtime of the peoples. Must we really go all the way up to Madison Square? Polly had asked Skaggs. Polly is his friend. Her brother Duff is with them as well. Why are they starting the rally so far north? To frighten the rich, Skaggs had said. At 12 o'clock, they spotted Duff, a member of the Order of United Americans and an official marcher. There were some women on Broadway, but Polly remained on the sidewalk, arm in arm with Skaggs. The crowds passed Union Square, where dozens stooped down to drink from the new fountain, and through the neighborhoods of the well-to-do. As the first marchers approached City Hall and the park, various factions began trying out various three-syllable chants: "Death to Kings" and "Anti-Rent" and "Liberty." Duff was a Liberty man. "Your brother seems to have passed out of his funk," Skaggs said, remembering Duff's mood at this very spot a week earlier. "Spring," Polly replied. "And I do believe that this allows him to feel like a kind of soldier again, as if he's doing righteous work, a member of a movement. Then he'll need to let his whiskers grow and buy some country clothes. Duff doesn't look like the part of a rad." She smiled. A large fraction of the crowd wore beards, and most of those with cravats had them hanging loose around their necks, flapping in the breeze like banners. Skaggs had not seen so many rough, broad-brimmed hats since he left Illinois. Were the New Yorkers impersonating the European Democrats, or were the European Democrats impersonating Americans? Polly found herself moved, both by the passionate fraternal fever and by the events she'd read about. That was prompting this march in cities thousands of miles away. That afternoon in Broadway, they had only rumors and hopeful hunches about the revolutions fevering through Europe like a contagion. They knew for certain only what had happened in France a month before. They had no idea that news of these events had been transmitted by telegraph to every capital in Europe. Spring arrived on the continent unusually wet and warm and stormy. And with the extreme weather were coming imitations of Paris in dozens of different cities and towns. Uprisings, revolts, and revolutions, undertakings variously heroic and madcap, sometimes both at once. Even on the rustic edges of the continent, in places like Spain and Ireland and Romania, Republicans and socialists and rioters of no particular creed were shouting and burning, shooting at the king's men. No one in New York yet knew that 2 weeks before, the Austrian monarchy had ended press censorship, granted a constitution, and forced its chancellor, Prince Metternich, old Europe's presiding genius and tyrant, to resign and leave Vienna. They had no idea that those events in Vienna had in turn inspired crowds in Berlin to stage their own protests at the palace of the Prussian king, who had capitulated the previous Sunday, or that on Monday in Munich, Bavaria's King Ludwig had abdicated, just as radicals in Milan had launched an insurrection that by Wednesday was entirely victorious, or that on Wednesday in Venice, a group of liberals had taken the arsenal and declared a republic, or that at this very hour in his winter palace in St. Petersburg, Tsar Nicholas was writing a proclamation that Russia would resist forever this evil of revolution. People all over Europe were sobbing and babbling, shuddering at what might happen next. Others, maybe fewer or maybe more, were laughing and singing over what had happened already. The people arise and kings quake, monarchies defeated and republics born. Voila. So there are also, as the book makes clear in various ways, kind of revolutions of various kinds going on in America at the same time, technological, social, and otherwise. Anyhow, these four young people get together and for various reasons end up not initially, but eventually together traveling across North America in 1848. So now I will go to the other section where they're halfway across America and have just about arriving. 2 years ago, this had been an empty bluff where birds and deer were occasionally shot, a mere 100 out of the 1,000,000 acres hunted by the local Indians. And then suddenly, weirdly to the Oto and the Omaha, who had become accustomed to the trickle of laughing, angry, frightened, childlike wanderers in their wagons passing through on their way, the whites believed, to some Western ocean, one particular horde of white people and their cattle had crossed the river and stopped here on this good scrap of the Indians' land and stayed. They'd called themselves saints. They declared the riverbank their winter quarters, which sounded reassuringly temporary to the natives, although the whites had remained for 2 winters before moving west. For 2 summers, 2 falls, 2 winters, and 2 springs, the saints had jammed themselves into their queer square city and outnumbered all of the Oto and Omaha by 2 to 1. But then, only a few months ago, the last of them disappeared into the sunset as suddenly as they had arrived, loading up and driving their 1,000 wagons toward the bleak country occupied by the Arapaho and, may the whites' God protect them, the Dakota, and over the mountains to the great desert. Why? They had simply abandoned all their buildings and burial grounds into which they had so recently invested so much furious sweat and pride. If they'd really known beforehand that they were going to leave 2 years after they arrived, why had they constructed permanent houses and stores? Not to mention their inexplicable wooden fence that stretched for 2 miles along the Missouri River. Was it all a monument to themselves or their God or some utterly bewildering folly? And why had such busy people failed to harvest and store enough wild grapes and plums and berries and roots and leaves in the summer and fall so that during the winter their flesh would not become scrawny and sick and black and dead? The saints had promised the Indians that after they left, they would never return, and said that any Omaha or Oto was free to take up residence in the square houses, to live in the city as if it were their own. And the offer apparently had been intended neither as a trap nor a joke. From the start, the saints had explained their way. From the start, the saints had explained their ways by saying they were a peculiar people a white tribe in the phrase of the interpreter. But to the Odo in Omaha, the Mormons were simply insane. Their tribe, they told the Indians, without smiles or embarrassment, had been created 16 years before. The Indians were sure there had been some mistake in the translation. No wonder the other whites in the East had driven them west across the big rivers to be rid of them for good. Since last spring, the Oto had been debating whether their descendants would believe a century hence, long after all the log houses had rotted into the earth, the story of the 10,000 white saints appearing from the East, building a city, and then almost immediately, for no good reason at all, disappearing into the West forever. Would the children of their children's children consider it an exaggeration or hallucination or some ancient fable? But since such an event had actually happened here on this very spot before their own eyes, some of them said, well then, all the old tales of talking bears and shape-shifting women must be true as well. And that's it. Apologize for my taking up time with my technical snafus, but anyway.
That's okay. I just have a question, Kurt. I think the last episode of Studio 360 was recorded at the end of February 2020, and I just wondered if that was pandemic related or it was planned already.
It was planned already, and in retrospect, and we were approaching our 20th anniversary, and in retrospect, it was like, because of the pandemic, it's like if I believed in Providence or divine something or other, I would think of it that way, because literally the final episode, I think, was February 29th, also a weird day, February 29th, but like, no, it had been planned for months and months, and no, it had nothing to do with the pandemic. It was, we made a special finale episode, and it was before we were even worried about the pandemic, because the next week we had a big crying farewell with lots of hugs, which of course a week after that we wouldn't have done. Well,
Yeah. And Emily, I just wanted to know how old your daughters are now.
My daughters are 15 years old. It's I read that essay and I could only tell those stories because they were so small. But it's a different experience now. It's like a world away. And throughout this whole year of the pandemic, everything that's been happening in Ethiopia has been really staggering. Terrifying, and still continuing. It's a sense of isolation is just multiplied because we just don't know a lot. The media has been really kicked out, so there's just the information is coming very third hand, and through the media has been in the dark, so we don't know the degree of the atrocities. We won't know for some time, So as we look forward to getting out of these prisons, our gilded prisons, there's a lot we're going to have to be accountable for on a global stage. It's a lot. Looking ahead with a lot of dread.
Yeah. And were you able to stay in touch, or did you want to stay in touch with the girls' original family?
Yeah. I feel very lucky because we have a relationship with them. It's the ways, social media, there's so many problems with it, but if it weren't for social media, I wouldn't have reconnected with their family. And so we have a relationship, but again, we've been unable to maintain a consistent connection because of the blackouts, the internet blackouts in Ethiopia. But we able to see them and, have used FaceTime and be part of each other's lives, at least virtually. So the story goes on.
Having had raised two girls into women and pass through 15, that they pass through 15. I'm wondering how 15-year-olds think of that, and if they read, as I'm sure they have read that story, like, wow, that was me as a baby. I mean, that must be, to have such a graphic second by second account of that must be kind of amazing for them.
It's like a story, that they're actors in the story, and they kind of see it that way. Their lives are so radically different in every way. But I'm grateful because we had, both my husband and I kept a kind of daily accounts of what was happening, what we were experiencing. And we had a lot of video we took. So I was amazed to go back and see the story there kind of fully formed. But the story is part of their life, but they are also so radically different than they were, obviously, and with no memory, and now it really is their story. It was an incredible part of my life. I mean, it made my life in many ways, but the story really does belong to them in a different way now, so they read it like anyone else. Like, those are interesting scenes.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you write so beautifully that I was thinking, after listening to Amy's beautiful story, like, wow, if we hadn't been told in advance, people will go, well, is that fiction or is that nonfiction? Similarly, given the particular story you read, Amy, like, is this nonfiction or fiction? I mean, I love that it wasn't, who knows? It's writing and it's a story,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've never been terribly interested in it's this or it's that. And I like when you could read something either way.
Yeah. Well, and your writing, which I've been a fan of for a long time, sometimes when I then began doing research, I'd say, oh, people said this. It wasn't my thought. That the line between your prose and your short fiction and poetry it seems poetic to some critics often. Is that have you ever veered off the reservation entirely and written poetry?
You're very kind to say that. I love reading contemporary poetry. I get a lot from it for my own work, but I don't know how to break a line. I don't know. I've studied, I've tried.
Yeah.
I understand sentences. I recognize a good sentence when I see it. I can't do that with a line of poetry. It isn't in here.
Yeah. Yeah. What is that? I mean, I tried and failed to write poetry I no longer try very much. But as a young person, I did, and I realized that, among other things, I just lacked some kind of almost not genetic, but it was a deeper thing than just, oh, I can't figure this out. It was like a feeling that this isn't really me, when I write poetry, when I tried writing poems.
But you've worked, Kurt, you've worked in so many forms. I'm just wondering, are you partial to the novel or pop theater?
I am. I've written short stories, and I feel like I don't feel like the short fiction the way I do about poetry. Like, I can't do that. I know I like short fiction. It is, as everybody knows and has talked about a million times. It is, at least in my experience, that there's no room for error or accident. And I like the room for error and accident and blemish and all the rest of the stuff you can load into a novel. So it just suits me in that way. I'd never written, these last two of my last three books have been these big nonfiction books, and I have no advanced degree. I have no standing to write history, but that I have found that I found that having written some novels over the last 20 years allowed me to write these big histories in a way much, I think, better than I certainly could have had I not done that. So yeah, I think, longer form is my thing. And now that I've, written these two books about how America got so terrible, I'm eager to return to fiction and make up different versions of life. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Amy, are you drawn to a particular form? The short story. It's your home.
It's my home. That's a lovely way to put it. And if anything, I go shorter and shorter. I'm lucky to have published a story that is one sentence long, because I have an editor who didn't say that's not a story. She was fine with it. But I love shorts. I love prose poems. The shorter, the better. For what I do. I have phrases that just are sort of trapped in my mind, and I've had a phrase, something you said, Emily, that I wondered if you could explain it, because some time back I think it was on PBS, you were being interviewed, and you said something about going from the South, where you were born and where segregation was in many places still a fact of life, of leaving that for the North. I know you went up to Yale, but you said something to do with close but not high, or high but not close. What can you just?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up hearing that. I mean, I probably heard it, several times a year throughout my entire childhood. The idea being that if you're a Black person in this country, in the South, white people want you close but not high. In the South, you can go as high as you want, but they don't want you close. So that was your choice. You can thrive professionally in the North, but don't expect friendship, don't expect community. But, in the South, the lives of Black and white people are embedded. They're intertwined. We have created each other's stories. So there's intimacy, but you are limited, of course, in terms of what you can achieve. You're fixed in place. So there's a cost either way. Yeah, I thought of that a lot over many years. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that for me. And I wanted to ask you something, and if it's not something you want to talk about, I know you've written about it, just say so, and Kurt will ask you a better question. But I was just stunned by your response to a really terrifying, dangerous thing that happened. As I think a lot of people know, I think it was when you were in grad school in New Haven, you survived a mass attack, a man with a knife, and you were injured, and you don't feel anger. Is that fair to say? And I am just fascinated by that.
Yeah, I thought about that, so I think about that often because, now well, there really isn't, a single mass shooting we haven't had where I haven't reflected, if this guy had a gun, I'd be dead. Yeah. It was 94, and we were less sophisticated in our mass, violence. So he had a gun. Excuse me, he had a knife. He was mentally ill, and I've gone through this so much in my mind, but he was deinstitutionalized too early. That's really what happened to him, and by extension, what happened to me. you know? He was literally an agent of a larger problem. And I can say that because it has been so many, August 7th, 1994, it's been a long time. But it's also true that I looked in the eyes of somebody who didn't know me, and who didn't intend to cause me harm, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
He was wild. His eyes were wild. I did not recognize another person in those eyes, which was scary in its own way. But in a strange way, it was hard to take personally. I know that sounds bizarre, but it was as if we were acting out, these roles.
Yeah.
But of course, I wouldn't be able to say this if I had been injured more seriously, or if anyone had died. There were 7 of us, and we all dealt with varying degrees of damage. Bruce Shapiro, who's become a very good friend of mine, and he wrote an amazing essay called "One Violent Crime" about when he was there as one of the victims. But I've learned to live with the consequences, and it has shaped my life so much that I've just had to learn to work with it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something that I could put to rest, because I have adhesions that keep sort of coming up.
Because it's just such an extreme surreal trauma that you just can't get it out of your head, or it makes you fearful. As long as we're talking about it, how did it affect your life?
Well, literally the adhesions, sent me back to the hospital.
I thought you were speaking figuratively. You mean literally?
Literally. So I've had I think I've had to learn to make meaning out of that literal truth that I have these adhesions are going to keep coming up in my life. There's no cure.
Huh.
So I've had to learn to make it meaningful, because it does affect me. I can't control the degree of the impact.
Thank you for speaking to that.
Oh yeah, of course.
What you say is extraordinary on the face of it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. Well, I do not want to cut you guys off because you have me on the edge of my seat here, but we are about 5 minutes away from 8 o'clock. So I do want to take a couple of questions. Let me see here. We have a couple from George Colt and Ann Fadiman. They are participating writers. So this first one is for Kurt. What got you hooked on 1848 as a year in which to set a novel? And as someone who writes both fiction and nonfiction, what made you choose to render it in fiction?
Yeah, well, back then I'd written. I had been a magazine writer, as George and Ann know, for many years, and so I had written nonfiction, but never a big nonfiction book. The first big books I wrote were not fiction. And so that's, I guess, that reason. And also because I didn't have a theory about 1848 or American history or modern life or anything at all. And I didn't want to, I waited until I was old to write these history books in which I have ideas and theories that I'm arguing, and I thought I discovered 1848 because somehow I'd missed it in college, and really started when I realized what a big deal 1848 had been in Europe, and all these revolutions that I talk about in that piece. And of course, as an American, what I learned about was the gold rush, California, we'll go west, all that. And so I just was thinking about those things and imagining characters then and thinking about how could one novel combine those two things, and it does. And then I just, immersed in 1848. Cynically, one of the reasons I liked it, in addition to not knowing very much about it, was, and this didn't come first, but once I was into it, I thought, And once I started doing the reading in history, I realized, wow, this is kind of a relatively virgin territory. This hasn't been overwritten about. It's not the Civil War. It's not the Revolutionary War. It's this 1840s. What's that? Oh yeah, pioneers, whatever. So it was comparatively virgin ground. And so that encouraged me. And as I say, I had these ideas of once I became besotted by the period, and I now do think it's the time modern America was born. I wanted to explore it in the way that you can only do in fiction, by making up people who live there, and rather than, talking about, Van Buren. I don't know anything about Van Buren. I don't care anything about Van Buren, really. Just I kind of fell in love with this moment of birth of America.
All right, awesome. Now this is another one from George and Anne. For Emily, have you written poetry? There are some beautiful similes in your work. And then they quote, "The earth like brown sugar."
Hi, George and Anne. It's so nice to see you guys. I think I'm like Amy in that I love reading poetry, but I could not write a poem. I used to think of myself as a poet when I was a child. My mother disabused me of that fantasy. When those lines got longer and longer, the poems turned into long essays. But I have a lot of admiration, for poets and what they can accomplish in such little space. And Amy Hempel for what she does in her sentences as well. Like you, I tend toward I like a nice tight sentence. But I cannot write poetry. But I love it. I admire poets greatly.
All right. And then this one is from Roz. They didn't put who it's for, so I guess any of you. Are there layers of your stories that you feel were over or underwritten? Amy, you want to take a stab at it?
I'm not sure about the word layers. What the person asking the question means. Layers?
Yeah. Roz, if you're here, maybe comment, what do you mean by layers? Are there layers of your stories that you feel were over or underwritten?
Or if Roz doesn't come back, something Raymond Carver said many years ago, obviously, came to mind. Something so moving in its modesty. And this is a different context, this question. But somebody once at one of his readings went up to him afterwards and said what a good story he had just read. And he said, "It's what I can do." And it just practically brings tears to my eyes again, just to say that. All I can say, I guess, in response, I might borrow Ray's comment and say to Roz, overwritten, underwritten, I don't know. It's what I can do. And someone else can speak to the question.
Perfect answer. Do you guys want to, Emily, Kurt, you want to pitch in or leave it at that?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, I just want to say about Amy, though, that for the writers that she is often compared to, like Ray Carver, her work to me, and this is not trying to cast shade on Ray Carver, but or anybody else, but it is so, to me, among other things, funny and rich in ways. Maybe I'm just, I don't know. I have been a huge fan of Amy Hempel for as long as I've been a serious reader, practically, and I just wanted to get that out before this date is over.
All right. Well, we have one more question. I think this is the perfect question to end on. It is from Claudia Acevedo Quinones. She is one of our writers for next week. So her question is, why do you write and whom do you write for? I guess let's start with Emily.
Why do I write? I heard Mary Gateskill answer this question once, and it really moved me. She said, "It's the way I love the world," and I thought that's so right. So I'll also borrow that and say that works for me too. Who do I write for? I think I'm always looking for friends. I think my writing is always looking for friends and hoping to make them, and hoping to meet people who are interested in the same things I'm interested in. So, I mean, anyone who is willing to read my work, I'm happy to write for you. So I don't have a specific. I think of it like message in the bottle. That's my writerly gesture, hoping it'll hit somewhere. Someone can use it. Someone can connect with someone.
Beautiful. Kurt, Amy, who wants to go next?
I'll go just so that Amy Hempel can finish, because that's what should happen. I pretty much, well, first of all, I started writing because people told me I could do it, and so that's what you can do. I'll keep trying it. That I can earn a living. But less practically than that, I would say that it's the only way I can really even fully understand what I think about anything, or I mean, and it's fine to have feelings and sentiment and emotions and thoughts that are half formed and not written and everything, and we all do, and that's fine. But if there are things I really want to understand, or more than just observe, writing is the way I'm able to fully perceive, I guess, is what I would say. And who I write for, I mean, myself, but not in the precious way, I don't know, or the whatever way, the annoying way that could be, but rather for I can only enjoy doing anything, including writing things, if I feel like if I would want it as a reader, I mean, I can't. Well, what would people like that want? I don't know, So kind of. As Emily was saying, I mean, people enough not like me to enjoy it, but I really can't. I write for myself to please me, really, and if there are a few more thousand who will be pleased too, and again, I don't want that to sound as though I don't care about readers. I love them more than anything, but it's not like I have, well, beyond my immediate family, readers in mind,
And Amy?
My flippant but partially true answer to that used to be because I couldn't get into veterinary school, thanks to a little thing called organic chemistry. But I don't mean to suggest that writing is the default position. It's the other great passion, animals, writing. A writer writes. I haven't been writing during the pandemic, but not because of the pandemic. I just don't write for a long time after I finish a book. So I hadn't planned to be working. I don't know what might come later. But it's, I don't know. I don't know. I just, I do have specific people in mind. A handful of people I write for, and people I love, whose work I love. And so it's, thank you, Emily, for bringing the Mary Gateskill comment to us. I think that's, I'd like to borrow Mary's comment as well.
All right. Well, I think that is the perfect close to tonight's evening. I want to thank you all, Amy, Emily, and Kurt, for participating in Write America. I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight, and of course to Roger Rosenblatt for making this whole series happen. Don't forget to click the button right down here, or visit bookreview.com to get your hands on signed copies of Kurt, Amy, and Emily's books, as well as all of the participating writers in Write America. And I hope to see you right back here next Monday night at 7 p.m. for readings from Julie Sheehan and Claudia Acevedos Quinones. So until next week, thank you and good night.